Thursday. If you wanted to be specific, 7:24 a.m. on Thursday morning. Harry had just had an idea for a truly brilliant experimental test. It would mean waiting an extra hour for breakfast, but that was why he had meal bars. No, this idea absolutely positively had to be tested right away, immediately, now. Harry found the book he wanted and raced back upstairs. The other boys were getting ready to go down to breakfast in the Great Hall and start the day. "Excuse me, can you do something for me? Pick 2 3-digit numbers from this list. Don't tell me what they are. Just multiply them together and tell me the product. Oh, and can you do the calculation twice to double check? Please make really sure you've got the right answer. I'm not sure what's going to happen to me or the universe if you make a multiplication error." Anthony wordlessly accepted the book and took out a parchment and quill. It said a lot about what life in that dorm had been like over the past few days that Anthony didn't even bother saying anything like, "Why'd you suddenly flip out?" or "That seems really weird. What are your reasons for asking?" or "What do you mean you're not sure what's going to happen to the universe?" Okay, 181,429. Harry wrote down 181,429. Then Harry raced back down into the cavern level of his trunk, glanced at his watch. The watch said 4:28, which meant 7:28. Around 30 seconds later, Harry heard the sound of steps, followed by the sound of the cavern level of his trunk sliding shut. He saw just what he'd been hoping to see. A folded piece of paper, the gift of his future self. Called that piece of paper, Paper 2. Harry tore a piece of paper off his pad. Call that Paper 1. It was, of course, the same piece of paper. Harry reviewed in his mind the algorithm that he would follow. The only possible stable time loop was the one in which Paper 2 contained the 2 prime factors of 181,429. If this worked, Harry could use it to recover any sort of answer that was easy to check but hard to find. Harry could use it to find the combinations on combination locks, or passwords of every sort. Maybe even find the entrance to Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, if Harry could figure out some systematic way of describing all the locations in Hogwarts. Harry took Paper 2 in his trembling hand and unfolded it. Paper 2 said, in slightly shaky handwriting, "Do not mess with time." To the best of Harry's knowledge, that had been the scariest experimental result in the entire history of science. Harry wrote down, "Do not mess with time," on Paper 1 in slightly shaky handwriting, folded it neatly, and resolved not to do any more truly brilliant experiments on time until he was at least 15 years old. That was how Harry's Thursday started. Harry and all the other boys in the first year were outside on a grassy field with Madame Hooch, standing next to the Hogwarts supply of broomsticks. The girls would be learning to fly separately. Apparently, for some reason, girls didn't want to learn how to fly on broomsticks in the presence of boys. Seriously, broomsticks? He was going to fly on, basically, a line segment? There was no way that the optimal designs for cleaning kitchens and flying would happen to coincide if you worked them out from scratch. "Stick out your right hand over the broom, or left hand if you're left-handed, and say up." The broomstick leapt eagerly into Harry's hand, which put him at the head of the class for once. Apparently, saying up was a lot more difficult than it looked, and most of the broomsticks were rolling around on the ground or trying to inch away from their would-be riders. Of course, Harry would have bet money that Hermione had done at least as well when it came her own turn to try earlier in the day. There couldn't possibly be anything he could master on the first try which would baffle Hermione, and if there was, and it turned out to be broomstick riding instead of anything intellectual, Harry would just die. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off from the ground hard. Keep your broom steady, rise a few feet, then come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle. 3, 2. One of the brooms shot skyward, accompanied by a young boy's screams. Of horror, not delight. The boy was spinning at an awful rate as he ascended. They only got glimpses of his white face. Harry was scrabbling for his wand, though he didn't really know what he planned to do with it. "Come back, boy!" And a fully automatic section of Harry's brain added Madame Hooch to his tally of fools. And the boy was thrown off the broomstick. He seemed to move very slowly through the air at first. "Wingardium Leviosa!" The spell failed. He could feel it fail. There was a thud and a distant cracking sound, and the boy lay face down on the grass in a heap. Harry sheathed his wand and raced forward at full speed. Harry saw with a shock that it was Neville Longbottom again. What was with him? Healer's pack! And it popped into his hand and... Broken wrist! Calm down, boy. He just has a broken wrist. There was a sort of mental lurch as Harry's mind snapped out of panic mode. Ah. Broken bone. Right. Setting string? That's for emergencies only. Put it away. He's fine. You're not seriously going to make him ride the broomstick again? Of course not. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear. Well, Potter, just wanted to say, when you take advantage of emergencies to demonstrate leadership, you want to look like you're in total control of the situation, rather than, say, going into a complete panic. But you probably scored a few points anyway. Thank you, Harry Potter, on behalf of Hufflepuff. It was a good try and a good thought. A good thought, indeed. Why didn't anyone in Hufflepuff have their wands out? Maybe if you'd all helped instead of just Potter, you could have caught him. I thought Hufflepuffs were supposed to stick together. Ernie was looking like he was torn between getting angry and wanting to die of shame. We didn't think of it in time. Ah, didn't think of it. I guess that's why it's better to have one Ravenclaw as a friend than all of Hufflepuff. Hey, what's this? Neville's Remember-All. What's a Remember-All? It turns red if you've forgotten something. It doesn't tell you what you forgot, though. Give it here, please, and I'll hand it back to Neville later. A sudden grin flashed across Mr. Goyle's face, and he spun around and raced away. Ernie stood still for a moment in surprise and ran after Mr. Goyle. And Mr. Goyle grabbed a broomstick, hopped on with one smooth motion, and took to the air. Harry's jaw dropped. Hadn't Madam Hooch said that would get him expelled? Hey! That's Neville's! Give it back! Come and get it, Hufflepuff! Draco, if you don't order that idiot back on the ground, the teacher's going to get back and... I can't. Everyone in Slytherin would think I'm weak. And if Mr. Goyle gets expelled, your father is going to think you're a moron. Hey, Slither Slime! Didn't anyone ever tell you that Hufflepuffs stick together? Wands out, Hufflepuff! And there were suddenly a whole lot of wands pointed in Mr. Goyle's direction. Wands out, Slytherin! Wands out, Gryffindor! Do something, Potter! I can't be the one to stop this. It has to be you. I'll owe you a favor. Just think of something. Aren't you supposed to be brilliant? By the time it was over and the teachers were done expelling people, the only boys left in his year would be Ravenclaws, realized Harry. Wands out, Ravenclaws! Gregory Goyle! I challenge you to a contest for possession of Neville's Remember-All! Oh, really? That sounds interesting. What sort of contest, Potter? Contest had been as far as Harry's inspiration had gotten. What sort of contest? He couldn't say chess because Draco wouldn't be able to accept without it looking strange. He couldn't say arm wrestling because Mr. Goyle would crush him. How about this? Gregory Goyle and I stand apart from each other, and no one else is allowed to come near either of us. We don't use our wands, and neither does anyone else. I don't move from where I'm standing, and neither does he. And if I can get my hands on Neville's Remember-All, then Gregory Goyle relinquishes all claim to that Remember-All he's holding and gives it to me. Ha, Potter! I'd like to see you do that! Mr. Goyle accepts. People were putting their wands away, and Mr. Goyle swooped gracefully to the ground, looking rather confused. Harry moved toward Mr. Goyle and stopped when he was a few paces away, far enough apart that they couldn't reach each other. Slowly, deliberately, Harry sheathed his wand. Everyone else backed away. Harry swallowed. He knew in broad outline what he wanted to do, but it had to be done in such a way that no one understood what he'd done. He took a deep breath and raised one hand, fingers ready to snap. There were gasps from anyone who'd heard about the pies, which was practically everyone. I call upon the insanity of Hogwarts! Happy, happy, boom, boom! Swamp, swamp, swamp! And Harry snapped his fingers. A lot of people flinched. And nothing happened. Harry let the silence stretch on for a while, developing, until... is that it? Ernie, would you look around on the ground where Neville fell and see if you can find Neville's Remember-All? Now Harry was getting a lot of strange looks. Just do it. No point in asking why. Trust me on this one. Merlin! It's here! Right where he fell! Mr. Goyle looked down and saw that he was still holding Neville's Remember-All. That's not possible, is it? It's a plot hole. I made myself weird enough to distract the universe for a moment, and it forgot that Goyle had already picked up the Remember-All. Anyway, once I get my hands on Neville's Remember-All, the contest is over, and Gregory Goyle has to relinquish all claim to the Remember-All he's holding and give it to me. Those were the terms, remember? Hold on! How do we know that's Neville's Remember-All? My bet was with Draco of the noble and most ancient house of Malfoy, not with you, Zabini. I have done what Mr. Malfoy said he'd like to see me do, and as for the judgment of the bet, I leave that up to Mr. Malfoy. You promise that actually is Neville's Remember-All? You have my word that the one Ernie's holding is Neville's. No comment about the one Gregory Goyle's holding. I won't question the word of the noble house of Potter, then, no matter how strange that all was. And the noble and most ancient house of Malfoy keeps its word as well. Mr. Goyle, give that to Mr. Potter. Hey! He hasn't won yet. He hasn't got his hands on. Catch, Harry! Harry easily snapped the Remember-All out of the air. He'd always had good reflexes that way. There! I win! Harry trailed off. The Remember-All was glowing bright red in his hand, blazing like a miniature sun that cast shadows on the ground in broad daylight. You are not to use the time turner in that fashion, Mr. Potter! Is the concept of secrecy not something that you understand? They don't know how I did it. They just think I can do really weird things by snapping my fingers. I had to do it, Professor. You did not have to do it. All you needed to do was get this anonymous Slytherin back on the ground and the wands put away. You could have challenged him to a game of exploding snap, but no. You had to use the time turner in a flagrant and unnecessary manner. It was all I could think of. I don't even know what exploding snap is. They wouldn't have accepted a game of chess, and if I'd picked arm wrestling, I would have lost. Then you should have picked wrestling! But then I'd have lost. Harry stopped. It was suddenly apparent to him that he'd had a lot of other options. Why had he picked that one? Because he'd seen a way to win. Win possession of an unimportant trinket that the teachers would have taken back from Mr. Goyle anyway. I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. I honestly didn't think of that, and you're right, I should have. It would have been brilliant if I had, but I just didn't think of that at all. One more display like that, Mr. Potter, and you will be returning that time turner. Do I make myself very clear? Yes, I understand, and I'm sorry. More importantly, why did the Remember-All go off like that? Does it mean I've been obliviated? That puzzles me as well. If it were that simple, I would think the courts would use Remember-Alls, and they do not. I shall look into it, Mr. Potter. You can go now. Sorry, I did have something else I wanted to tell you. It's about Professor Quirrell. I'm sure, Mr. Potter, that it is nothing of importance. Surely you heard the headmaster tell the students that you were not to bother us with any unimportant complaints about the defense professor? But this could be important. Yesterday, I got the sudden sense of doom when... Mr. Potter! If you have discovered anything that seems interesting about Professor Quirrell, please feel free not to share it with me or anyone else. Now, I think you've taken up enough of my valuable time. This isn't like you! I'm sorry, but that just seems unbelievably irresponsible. From what I've heard, there's some kind of jinx on the defense position, and if you already know something's going to go wrong, I'd think you'd all be on your toes. Go wrong, Mr. Potter? I certainly hope not. After Professor Blake was caught in a closet with no fewer than 3 fifth-year Slytherins last February, and a year before that, Professor Summers failed so completely as an educator that her students thought a Bogart was a kind of furniture, it would be catastrophic if some problem with the extraordinarily competent Professor Quirrell came to my attention now, and I dare say most of our students would fail their defense owls and newts. I see. So in other words, whatever's wrong with Professor Quirrell, you desperately don't want to know about it until the end of the school year. And since it's currently September, he could assassinate the Prime Minister on live television and get away with it, so far as you're concerned. At Hogwarts, we strive to be proactive with respect to anything that threatens the educational attainment of our students. Since you and I have already discussed matters far more sensitive than these, I shall speak frankly. You, and you alone, have reported this mysterious sense of doom. You, and you alone, are a chaos magnet, the likes of which I have never seen. I can well foresee that I am fated to sit in the headmaster's office and hear some hilarious tale about Professor Quirrell in which you and you alone play a starring role, after which there will be no choice but to fire him. And if this sad event takes place any earlier than the Ides of May, I will string you up by the gates of Hogwarts with your own intestines and pour fire beetles into your nose. Now, do you understand me completely? What do I get if I can make it happen on the last day of the school year? Get out of my office! Thursday. There must have been something about Thursdays in Hogwarts. Harry was standing next to Professor Flitwick, in front of the great stone gargoyle that guarded the entrance to the headmaster's office. Apparently, Dumbledore had said that Harry was far too young to invoke the words of power and madness.
Please don't worry too much, Mr. Potter. Headmaster Dumbledore may seem a little odd, or a lot odd, or even extremely odd, but he has never hurt a student in the slightest, and I don't believe he ever will.
This was not helping. And the stone gargoyle walked aside with a very natural and ordinary movement that Harry found rather shocking, since the gargoyle still looked like solid, immovable stone the whole time. Behind the gargoyle was a set of slowly revolving spiral stairs. There was something disturbingly hypnotic about it, and even more disturbing was that revolving the spiral ought not to take you anywhere.
Up you go! Good luck!
Harry rather nervously stepped onto the spiral and found himself, for some reason that his brain couldn't seem to visualize at all, moving upward. And after a rather dizzying time, Harry found himself in front of an oak door with a brass griffin knocker. And Harry saw the most interesting room he'd ever seen, and behind the desk was a well-cushioned throne containing Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
Hello, Harry.
Hello, Headmaster.
Please, Harry. Headmaster sounds so formal. Just call me for short.
You, said something about my being too young to invoke the words of power and madness?
That you most certainly are. Thankfully, the words of power and madness were lost 7 centuries ago, and no one has the slightest idea what they are anymore.
Why did you call me here, then?
Why? Harry, if I went around all day asking why I do things, I'd never have time to get a single thing done. I'm quite a busy person, you know.
Yes, it was a very impressive list. Headmaster of Hogwarts, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Sorry to ask, but I was wondering, is it possible to get more than 6 hours if you use more than one time turner? Because it's pretty impressive if you're doing all that on just 30 hours a day.
I'm afraid time doesn't like being stretched out too much. And yet we ourselves seem to be a little too large for it, and so it is a constant struggle to fit our lives into time.
Indeed. That's why it's best to come to our points quickly. For a moment, Harry wondered if he'd gone too far.
Straight to the point it shall be. Harry, this Monday you did something that should have been impossible even with a time turner. Or rather, impossible with only a time turner. Where did those 2 pies come from, I wonder? A natural thought is that since none of the first years present were able to cast such a spell, someone else was present, and yet unseen. And if no one could see them, why, it would be easy enough for them to throw the pies. One might further suspect that since you had a time turner, you were the invisible one, and that since the spell of disillusionment is far beyond your current abilities, you had an invisibility cloak. Don't worry, Harry. You haven't done anything wrong. Invisibility cloaks aren't against the rules. I suppose they are rare enough that no one ever got around to putting them on the list. But there is one which might find its own way to a destined wearer. And so I cannot help but wonder if by some strange chance you have found not just an invisibility cloak, but the cloak of invisibility, one of the 3 deathly hallows, and reputed to hide the wearer from the gaze of death himself. Am I on the right track so far, Harry?
Harry was frozen. There was a full flood of adrenaline in his system now, and it was entirely useless.
May I see it, Harry?
He was about to lose the cloak that had been passed down through the Potters for who knew how long.
Harry, if you don't want to, you can just say no.
I can?
Yes, Harry. It seems that you're afraid of me, Harry. Yet surely you realize that I do not need your permission to see the cloak. I am powerful enough to draw it forth myself, mokeskin pouch or no. But this I will not do. The cloak is yours, Harry. I will not seize it from you, not even to look at it for just a moment, unless you decide to show it to me.
If you really don't need my permission, then you have it. Harry held out the pouch to Dumbledore and bit down hard on his lip, sending that signal to himself in case he was obliviated afterward.
Ah, I was right. Centuries old and still as perfect as the day it was made. We have lost much of our art over the years, and now I cannot make such a thing myself. No one can. Do not sell it. Do not give it to anyone as a possession. Think twice before you show it to anyone, and ponder 3 times again before you reveal that it is a deathly hallow. Treat it with respect, for this is indeed a thing of power.
And then he handed the cloak back to Harry. There was a note with the cloak. It said that you would try to take the cloak from me if you knew. I don't know who left the note, though. I really don't.
I see. Well, Harry, I won't impugn the motives of whoever left you that note. Who knows, but that they themselves may have had the best of good intentions. They did give you the cloak, after all. I will only ask that you think twice and ponder 3 times again the next time someone tells you to distrust me.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have distrusted you.
Alas, Harry, in this world, I cannot even say you were unwise. You did not know me, and in truth there are some at Hogwarts who you would do well not to trust. Perhaps even some you call friends.
Dumbledore stood up from his chair and began examining one of his instruments.
He probably seems to you quite charming. Polite to you, at least. Well-spoken. Maybe even admiring. Always ready with a helpful hand, a favor, a word of advice.
Oh, Draco Malfoy! You've got it all wrong. He's not turning me. I'm turning him.
You're what?
I'm going to turn Draco Malfoy from the dark side. You know, make him a good guy.
Are you certain that whatever goodness you think you see in him is not just wishful thinking, Harry? I fear that what you see is only the lure, the bait.
Not likely. I mean, if he's trying to disguise himself as a good guy, he's incredibly bad at it. I'm targeting him for redemption specifically because he's the heir to House Malfoy. And if you had to pick one person to redeem, it would obviously be him.
You're trying to plant the seeds of love and kindness into Draco's heart because you expect the heir of Malfoy to prove valuable to you?
Not just to me, to all of magical Britain, if this works out. And he'll have a happier and mentally healthier life himself. Look, I don't have enough time to turn everyone away from the dark side. Dumbledore started laughing a lot harder than Harry would expect, almost howling.
Oh, Harry, one symptom of the disease called wisdom is that you begin laughing at things that no one else thinks are funny. Because when you're wise, Harry, you start getting the jokes. Ah me, oft evil will shall evil mar indeed, in very deed.
Hey, that's a Tolkien quote! Gandalf says that!
Theoden, actually. It seems that my Muggle-born students tend to think alike in certain ways. I have accumulated no fewer than 20 copies of The Lord of the Rings and 3 sets of Tolkien's entire collected works. I fear there have been precious few Balrogs in my life of late. Nowadays it's all meetings of the Wizengamot, where I must try desperately to prevent any work from getting done, and formal dinners where foreign politicians compete to see who can be the most obstinate fool, and being mysterious at people, knowing things I have no way of knowing, making cryptic statements which can only be understood in hindsight, and all the other small ways in which powerful wizards amuse themselves after they have left the part of the pattern that allows them to be heroes. Speaking of which, Harry, I have a certain something to give you. Something which belonged to your father.
Dumbledore went back to his desk and sat down, pulling out one of the drawers as he did so. He reached in using both arms and, straining slightly, pulled a rather large and heavy-looking object out of the drawer, which he then deposited on his oaken desk with a huge thunk.
This was your father's rock.
Harry stared at it. It was light gray, discolored, irregularly shaped, sharp-edged, and very much a plain, old, ordinary, large rock. Is it a magical rock?
Not so far as I know. I took this from the ruins of James and Lily's home in Godric's Hollow, and I have kept it from then until now, against the day when I could give it to you. I advise you with the greatest possible stringency to keep it close about your person at all times.
I'll put it in my pouch then.
That may not be close enough to your person. And what if your mokeskin pouch is lost or stolen?
You think I should just carry a big rock everywhere I go? I'd think the other students would tend to ask me questions about that.
Tell them I ordered you to do it. No one will question that, since they all think I'm insane.
So, why do I have to carry this rock, exactly?
I can't think of a reason, actually.
You can't.
But just because I can't think of a reason, doesn't mean there is no reason.
In the mixture of hypotheses that served as Harry's model of the world, Dumbledore's insanity was rapidly rising in probability.
Ah, Harry, when we are young, we believe that we know everything. And so we believe that if we see no explanation for something, then no explanation exists. When we are older, we realize that the whole universe works by a rhythm and a reason, even if we ourselves do not know it. It is only our own ignorance which appears to us as insanity.
I'm not even sure I should be saying this, but that is simply not the correct way to deal with our admitted ignorance of how the universe works. I don't even know if that fallacy has an official name, but if I had to make one up myself, it would be privileging the hypothesis, or something like that. When there are lots of possible answers, most of the evidence you need goes into just locating the true hypothesis out of millions of possibilities. So if you just jump ahead with that evidence and promote one particular possibility to the focus of your attention, you're skipping over most of the work. You don't need proof or the sort of official evidence that scientists or courts demand, but you need some sort of hint. And that hint has to discriminate that particular possibility from the millions of others. And there's got to be a million other things I could do besides carrying around my father's rock. Just because I'm ignorant about the universe doesn't mean that I'm unsure about how I should reason in the presence of my uncertainty.
Ah, an interesting argument, certainly. It is a common misconception of Ravenclaws that all the smart children are sorted there, leaving none for the other houses. This is not so. Being sorted to Ravenclaw indicates that you are driven by your desire to know things, which is not at all the same quality as being intelligent. Nonetheless, you do seem rather intelligent. Less like an ordinary young hero and more like a young, mysterious, ancient wizard. I think I may have been taking the wrong approach with you, Harry, so I shall be daring and offer you a certain other heirloom.
Finally, Dumbledore rose back up out of the drawer, holding the objective of his search, which he set down on the desk alongside the rock. It was a used, ragged-edged, worn-spined textbook. Intermediate Potion Making, by Libatius Borage.
This was your mother's 5th-year potion textbook,
which I am to carry with me at all times,
which holds a terrible secret, a secret whose revelation could prove so disastrous that I must ask you to swear, and I do require you to swear it seriously, Harry, whatever you may think of all this, never to tell anyone or anything else.
Harry considered his mother's 5th-year potions textbook, which, apparently, held a terrible secret.
Do you swear, Harry? Otherwise, I cannot tell you.
Yes, I swear. That was the trouble with being a Ravenclaw. You couldn't refuse an offer like that, or your curiosity would eat you alive, and everyone else knew it.
And I swear in turn that what I am about to tell you is the truth.
Dumbledore opened the book, seemingly at random.
Do you see these notes, written in the margins of the book? The ones in this handwriting were written by your mother, and the ones in this handwriting were written by me. I would turn myself invisible and sneak into her dorm room while she was sleeping. Lily thought one of her friends was writing them, and they had the most amazing fights.
This was the exact point at which Harry realized that the headmaster of Hogwarts was, in fact, crazy.
Do you understand the implications of what I have just told you, Harry?
Sorry, not really.
Ah well, I suppose your intelligence has limits after all, then. It seems I was greatly premature in my enthusiasm. Shall we all just pretend I didn't say anything incriminating?
Of course. You know, it's actually getting rather late in the day, and I'm a bit hungry, so I should be going down to dinner, really. And Harry made a beeline for the door.
There were more things I planned to say to you, and if you leave now, you will not know what they are.
Sometimes Harry absolutely hated being a Ravenclaw.
You wound me, Harry. Do you not at least realize what I have told you is a sign of trust? I'd hoped for better from you, Harry Potter. I'd heard that your own friends also think you mad. I know they are mistaken. Will you not believe the same of me?
When Harry turned back around, he saw that the powerful, insane wizard was once more smiling and looking friendly. That was good, maybe.
It would have been terribly unwise to let you leave without your father's rock.
Harry went over to the desk, twisted his moleskin pouch up around to the front of his belt, and, with some effort, managed to heave up the rock in his 11-year-old arms and feed it in. His mother's 5th-year potions textbook, which held a secret that was in fact pretty terrible, followed shortly after. As long as I'm hanging around, I don't suppose you would like to give me a bit of a tour of your office? I'm a bit curious as to what some of these things are.
I am flattered by your interest, but I'm afraid there isn't much to say. These are the portraits of the past headmasters at Hogwarts. This is my desk. This is my chair.
Excuse me, actually I was wondering about those.
Oh, the little fiddly things. They came with the headmaster's office, and I have absolutely no idea what most of them do. Although this dial, with the 8 hands, counts the number of, let's call them sneezes, by the left-handed witches within the borders of France. You would not believe how much work it took to nail that down. And this one with the golden wibblers is my own invention, and Minerva is never, ever going to figure out what that one does. Here, of course, we have the sorting hat. I believe the two of you have met. It told me that it was never again to be placed on your head under any circumstances. You're only the 14th student in history it is said that about. Baba Yaga was another one, and I'll tell you about the other 12 when you're older. This is an umbrella. This is another umbrella. And of course, most people who come to my office want to see Fawkes.
Dumbledore was standing next to the bird on the golden platform.
Fawkes is a phoenix. Very rare, very powerful magical creatures.
Say something intelligent. Don't just stand there sounding like a gibbering moron. Well, what the heck am I supposed to say? Anything. You mean anything besides Fox is a chicken? Yes, anything but that. So, what sort of magic do phoenixes do then?
Their tears have the power to heal. They are creatures of fire and move between all places as easily as fire may extinguish itself in one place and be kindled in another. The tremendous strain of their innate magic ages their bodies quickly, and yet they are as close to undying as any creature that exists in this world, for whenever their bodies fail them, they immolate themselves in a burst of flame and leave behind a hatchling, or sometimes an egg. Looking a little peaky there, I'd say.
By the time the statement registered fully in Harry's mind, the chicken was already on fire. The blaze was brief, intense, and entirely self-contained. There was no smell of burning.
Don't look so horrified, Harry. Fawkes hasn't been hurt. Look, here's an egg. But now we really should get on with things.
Leaving the egg behind in the ashes of the chicken, he returned to his throne and seated himself.
Well, I fear I have a confession to make, Harry. A confession and an apology. I'm afraid, Harry, that I've been manipulating you your entire life. It was I who consigned you to the care of your wicked step-parents.
My step-parents aren't wicked. My parents, I mean.
They aren't? Not even a little wicked?
Shut up, you idiot! He'll take you away from them!
No! I was just trying to spare your feelings. They're actually very wicked.
They are? What do they do?
I have to do dishes and wash math problems, and they don't let me read a lot of books, and...
Good. That's good to hear. I apologize for that, then. I'm sorry to say, Harry, that I am responsible for virtually everything bad that has ever happened to you. I know that this will probably make you very angry.
Yes, I'm very angry. Grrr! Harry's internal critic promptly awarded him the all-time award for the worst acting in the history of ever.
And I just wanted to let you know. I wanted to tell you as early as possible, in case something happened to one of us later, that I am truly, truly sorry.
And I'm very angry. So angry that I want to leave right now unless you've got something else to say.
One last thing then, Harry. You are not to attempt the forbidden door on the 3rd floor corridor. There is no possible way you could get through all the traps, and I wouldn't want to hear that you've been hurt trying. Why, I doubt that you could so much as open the first door, since it's locked, and you don't know the spell Alamora.
Harry spun around and bolted for the exit at top speed. There must have been something about Harry Potter. It was Thursday for everyone, after all, and yet this sort of thing didn't seem to happen to anyone else.
What were you doing in the headmaster's office? Were you talking about the defense professor?
No! Dumbledore called me up there, and he gave me this big rock, and said it was my father's, and I should carry it everywhere. I see. That's a bit strange, even for him. I apologize for doubting you. Professor McGonagall, do you think I should carry my father's rock everywhere? That is between you and the headmaster, I'm afraid. I will say that ignoring the headmaster completely is almost never wise. I am sorry to hear of your dilemma, Mr. Potter, and if there's any way I can help you with whatever you decide to do... Actually, I was thinking that once I know how, I could transfigure the rock into a ring and wear it on my finger. If you could teach me how to sustain a transfiguration... It is good that you asked me first. If you lost control of the transfiguration, the reversal would cut off your finger and probably rip your hand in half. But I can have a ring forged for you with a setting for a jewel, a small jewel, in contact with your skin, and you can practice sustaining a safe subject like a marshmallow. When you have kept it up successfully, even in your sleep, for a full month, I will allow you to transfigure, your father's rock. I'm sorry about this, Mr. Potter. I apologize again for mistrusting you. But now it's my own turn to see the headmaster. Good luck, I guess. Professor McGonagall walked over to the gargoyle, inaudibly spoke the password, and stepped through into the revolving spiral stairs.
Professor McGonagall, the headmaster set fire to a chicken!
He what?